Welcome back, everybody. Let's talk about the blues. Today we're going to be focusing on the 12-bar blues, which might not mean anything to you at all. That's perfectly fine. We'll get into all of it. What we need to start out with, though, is the feeling of the blues. And so let's go ahead and jump right into our PDF. You should have this downloaded already. This is a bunch of words that all means the attitude is the most important thing in the blues. So there's a blues form, there's a blues scale, there's all kinds of technique and theory that goes into the blues, but it's all just an examination of what we get out of the blues, taking something that already exists, the blues, and saying, how could we replicate this thing? But all of that analysis is really not the blues. The blues exists already, it's there, it's a spirit, it's an attitude that it helps if you get into that space before you start on all the theory and reproducing the blues, as if the blues is a thing. The 12-bar blues is a thing. Let's talk about how to make the 12-bar blues. So the notes and the attitude go together. When we talk about something being blue or having blue notes in it, what we're usually referring to is flatting the third of a key. So in the key of C, for example, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 notes, and then it repeats back over again. If that was confusing, then we should take a look at some of our scales lessons. We're not going to go into all of that on how to build major scales, but we will be dealing with the C major scale. And so the third note in the C major scale is E. If we just flat that note, meaning we play the note just slightly to the left of it, that right there will already turn pretty much any song into a blues. If we just take that third note and we flat it, or at least it'll start to have some of the attitude of the blues. So if we do something like you hear that, like that note right there, has that like grit to it. Right? So flatted 3 has a lot to do with the blues and the attitude of the blues, and you can already start to feel it. We've only changed one note here, and already we can start to hear like that grit that's in there. Well, there are other notes too that will also give you that grit if you've already got the attitude behind the blues. If you already have the blues and you're wanting to play notes that sound like your feelings, flatting the 3 is one of the things you can do. And if we take a look at the PDF now, here is the C major scale that we started out with, just the regular notes, and then right next to it is the blues scale. Now I say the blues scale with a bit of a grin because depending on where you learn your blues scale, there are different variations on it. So I have put these notes right here in gray because these are the most disputed notes of the ones that I'm giving to you, but definitely the 1 is in the scale. We'd probably get rid of the 2 entirely. As you can see here, we have no 2, whereas before we had, in the major scale, we had the 2 being D. We just got rid of it entirely. Now, that does not mean that while you're playing the blues, you can't play the 2. It's just not in the blues scale, the right blues scale. I hate all of these terms. So we've got the 1, we've got the flat 3, which in the case of C would be E flat. Then we'd play the 4. And then if we're passing from the 4 to the 5, we could go through an F sharp, which would be like a flat 5 or a sharp 4. I prefer to think of it as a flat 5, but I've got listed here as a sharp 4. So 1, flat 3, 4, sharp 4 or flat 5 to a 5. Now, I like this note all on its own. I'll tell you why here in just a second after we go to the other disputed note. This one right here is a flat 7, so we skipped the 6 entirely. There was no 2, there was no 2, and there was no 6 at all. So we've added some notes, we've taken some notes out. 1, flat 3, 4, sharp 4 or flat 5, 5, and then instead of 7, we go to the flat 7, and then if we're going once again from the 7, the flat 7 up to the 1, we could pass through that note right there. 7 to 1 or 1 to 7. 5 down to 4 or 4 up to 5. And then flat 3, and then 1. Now what this really comes from is the bending of notes that we can't really do on the piano. So if you were singing these notes or playing them on, pretty much any other instrument, a guitar or a violin even, or a trumpet or a saxophone, we could bend the notes. We can go from one note and like slide into the next one. But we just have buttons here that we're pressing. I can play either that note or that note, but I can't really have a note that's in between there. So these are where like these notes really come into play here. If we really wanted this note right here, like I want the note that's in between there. But so on the piano, if I was singing, but I can't really do that on piano. So that's where that note comes in. It's really just kind of like a 4 that got bent up. I just can't bend on piano. Or it could be a 5 that got flatted down. If I had like, so it could be a flat 5, or it could be, a sharp 4, either one of those. Or if you're just passing through it, like I said, then you could play all of those notes, the sharp 4 and the 7 that kind of is in between the flat 7 and the 1. I can't really use this one nearly as effectively by itself though. This one I can find all kinds of uses for that one. But this one right here, it's hard for me to find a place where I like the sound of it, except in between those notes if I'm playing the right blues scale. Then as you can see, I've given you the blues scale for all of the different keys here in your PDF. So if you want to play a G blues scale, here's your original G scale, your G major scale, and then here's how we would turn that into a G blues scale. Same exact process. You're still following these of taking out the 2nd and the 6th note, you're lowering the 3rd note by a half step, and then you're adding the notes that are a half step above the 4 and a half step below the 7. That will come up with your correct blues scale every single time. So on a chart, it looks something like this. These are the notes in C. So I've given you C, E flat, F, the controversial perhaps G flat or F sharp, up to the G, B flat to B, and then it's supposed to just repeat back over again. But even if you take out the controversial notes, these ones right here, that would sound great. Now, if you do that over multiple octaves, you have something that looks like this. So this is your 1st octave right here, and this is your 2nd octave, and this is the beginning of your next octave. So at this point, we have something like that with our in-between notes. And of course, like I said, there are multiple versions of the blues scale. Some people really hate that note and don't even include it in the blues scale. Other people do. Then there's a thing called the Kansas City blues scale too, which is an entirely separate set of notes. This is like the blues, except it's like a happier version of the blues. We're not going to talk a lot about Kansas City blues. We talk about it in other lessons. But this would be a much happier blues. You can see we still have that flat 3 in there though. Now we've gotten rid of the flat 7 and all of the in-between notes. We don't have that really gritty note right there. We don't have the 4 anymore. We've got just pretty much all pretty notes. If you've played the pentatonic scale before, you recognize these notes. You just take out the E flat right here. If you took that note out, it'd just be the pentatonic scale. And if that didn't make any sense, don't worry about it. It wasn't that important anyway. But it is the pentatonic scale just with an added flat 3. So pretty much any blues scale you're going to run into has that flat 3 in common. It's probably the most important note of the blues. And we're already at the last part of the blues, which is the form, and this is the part, of course, that is the most complex as well. So once you know your blues scale in all 12 keys, and you know variations on the blues scale in all 12 keys, you're like, what's left? There is the blues. Now, if anything is the blues, it's this. It's the form that I'm about to show you, the 12-bar blues. If you were to just go anywhere on the globe and sit down and some musician came up to you and said, hey, let's play the blues in C, what they mean is this. They want to play a certain set of chords from that key in a certain order. First, let's talk about what the chords are. So in the key of C, you're going to be using a C, an F, and a G because those are the 1, the 4, and the 5 of the key. And those are the most important chords. There are tons of variations, but those are the most important chords in any key for the blues. So the 1 chord in the key of C would be a C. The 2 chord in the key of C would be a D minor, but that one's all grayed out because we don't care about the 2 chords for the 12-bar blues. The 3 also we don't care about. That would be an E minor. So that would be the 1 chord, the 2 chord, the 3 chord. Then we're on to the 4 chord, which is the F chord, and we do care about that one. And then we have the 5 chord, and then we're not going to care about the 6 or the 7, so those don't really matter. I just put them in there so you could see that there are chords in between the ones that we'll be using. We'll be pulling out the 1, the 4, and the 5 of the key. And it's also important to note, or maybe it's not important, and I just have to tell you because that's the way my teacher brain works, that all the ones that we skipped out on are all of the minor chords. So the 2, the 3, the 6, and the 7 all have other symbols after them because they are some variation on a minor chord. The ones that we're playing are the only ones that don't have anything after the letter. They're the major chords. So we're pulling the major chords out of the key and just using those for the blues. The 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord. And now on the following page, I'm showing you what order you're supposed to put those chords in. I've written it in the key of C, because that's the one that we're using as an example. But more importantly is that you remember what the numbers are and where they go. It's called the 12-bar blues because a bar is how we refer to a measure oftentimes in music. So if we say we're just going to play 4 bars, what we mean is 4 measures or 4 counting to 4s. So if we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I counted to 4 times. That means that we counted 4 measures because each one of those groups of 4 counts was a measure or a bar. So if we have a 12-bar blues, how many times are we going to count to 4? 12 times because we've got 12 bars, 12 measures. And that's what we have going on here. We've got 1 bar right here. We've got our 2nd bar right there. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Sure enough, 12 bars in our 12-bar blues. And really more importantly than that, we have 3 sections, 3 sets of 4 bars. So we've got this section right here, which we're going to call the 1 section. Then we have this section right here that we're going to call the 4 section. And then we have this one down here that we're going to call the 5 section or the turnaround section. I'll show you why. For the whole first section, the 1 section, all 4 of those bars is going to be the 1 chord. Now in the key of C, we already talked about how the C chord is the 1 chord. So we would play that. You can either play it once and hold it out, or you could play it multiple times, but that chord needs to not change for 4 counting to 4s. So if we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. That was that first whole line. I played the 1 chord, and I played it once on each measure, but I could have held it out the whole time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Or played it many times. 1, 2, 3, 4. So what you do with the 1 chord is totally up to you, but it needs to not change chords during that first entire 4 bars, 4 measures, the 1 section. Now it seems like the next section should be called the 2 section, but we're calling it the 4 section because, hopefully you already noticed, we've got a 4 chord right here. So because the 4 chord is the beginning of the next section, that's going to be called the 4 section. And the 4 chord is going to last for 2 bars, 2 measures, before we go back to the 1 again. So really on this first line, we're playing all the 1 chord. We can play the 1 chord anywhere in here. Any of this works. This is all the 1 chord. So we're going to do that for 4 bars, and then we're going to move to the 4 chord and then be pulled right back to the 1 chord. So 6 out of the first 8 bars are all 1 chord. If you know the 1 chord, that's almost the entire first 2 sets of 4 bars. So you probably already guessed the reason we're calling the last section the 5 section is because it starts with 5, and we have a 5 chord right there, and it comes back to the 1 right there for the last 2 bars, and then it just starts back over again. And pretty much you can loop this thing forever. I mean, it wouldn't be uncommon at all to play like 20 or 30 loops through these set of chords. And then someone would solo over top of it or whatever. And if you listen to like, especially some of the older blues or like some Ray Charles or any B.B. King stuff, they're gonna go through this loop at least 10 to 15 times within a single song. So at this point, you actually know the 12-bar blues. This is the 12-bar blues. You can play it in any key that consists of a 1 section, a 4 section, and a 5 section. Now to try this out, if you think that you can move through those chords, you can click on this guy right here, and that will give you a play-along track, and you can try playing the 12-bar blues. Let's try it once together. We'll call out the numbers as we go. If you could call them out too while you're playing, that would be great. Here we go. This is 1 chord, 1 chord, 1 chord. Here comes the 4, ready, and 4 chords. And a 4 chord, back to the 1 chord, and the 1 chord, to the 5 chord, to the 1 chord. Now I'll play those numbers down here. We're going to start with the 1, 1, 1, 1, 4, 4, 1, 1, 5, 5, 1. Or maybe the whole chord with the left hand. It sounds something like this. And here we go. We're going to the 4 and 4. And 1. And 1. Here we go to the 5. To the 1. And the 1. And the blues scale works over the entire thing. The blues scale is going to work through all of the chords, and then anything you can do in the left hand to help out with the chords and stuff, that kind of frees your right hand up to do stuff. Or just ignore the left hand entirely and just play your blues scale over top of that. But that's what we mean when we say, let's play the blues. We mean, let's play the 12-bar blues, these chords in this order, except sometimes there's some variations. Let's check them out. So the first variation that we have is where we're going to add in a note to each of the chords. So this is a C chord, and then for reasons that I'm not going to explain here, but I've done it in multiple other workshops, if you add in the note that is 2 half steps below the root of the chord. I know there were a lot of words in there, but like I said, there's long explanations in other workshops. We're going to take this root right here, the C, and we're going to go a whole step or 2 half steps below it. 1, 2. This is now known as a C7 chord. That right there. And of course, just like with the C chord, we could play the C chord anywhere we wanted. That B flat, we can add that in anywhere we want to. So we could add in the B flat right there. That's a C7. 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 So you can add in that B flat anywhere you want. We now have a C7 chord. For the F chord, we're almost done. F, we're going to go down 1, 2 half steps. We now have an F7, or an F7, or an F7, or an F7, or F7, or F7. And then same thing with the G. We're going to go from the G down 1, 2 half steps. We now have a G7, or 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 a G7. And now we have, these are known as dominant chords, or 7 chords, for each of the different chords that we're using in the blues. So now we have, it sounds a little more bluesy, and you might remember this is one of the notes that we added in from the blues scale. And now we have our F7, and back to the C7, and to the G7, to the F7, to the C7. And this already sounds way more bluesy, and we've only added in 1 note to each of the chords. But still, when I play this form along with the play-along track that we already played, or with any of these songs that we listed here above, these are all just a few examples. I'm sure we'll be adding to the list a few examples of songs that you might have heard of that are 12-bar blues songs. You go to play along with them, you're like, oh, well, this is just the 1, and then the 4, and then the 1, and then the 5, and then the 1 at the end. Well, if you play along with some of them and you use this exact format right here, it's not going to always sound perfect because there are also other chord variations. There are things you can do in the 1 section, or in the 4 section, or in the 5 section that make this thing just a little bit more complex. This is the 12-bar blues. Don't get me wrong. This is the bare bones. This is the skeleton of the 12-bar blues. And then it just gets crazy after that. So if you already have this down, you already have the 12-bar blues, maybe tread no further. But if you feel daring, let's check out some of the most common variations. So these variations right here use the exact same chords, but we've inserted some of like the 4 chord and the 5 chord in some other places where we didn't have them before. So during the 1 section, it's still the 1 section. It's still all 1. But just because it's so long, sometimes we break it up with a 4 chord right here in the key of C. That would be an F7. So we'll go from a 1 right here to a 4, and then right back to the 1. So it's still almost entirely 1 chord, but we just break it up a little bit there with the F7. So it sounds something like this. It'd go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. That was the 1 section, even though I sneaked in a little 4 chord in there. And that's also in your backing track. So if you play along with your play-along track, it would sound something like this. But now when I go to the 4 chord, you go, oh, that's what I was hearing before. It sounded a little bit weird right there. But when I go to the 4 chord, it makes more sense. So here we go, 2, and a 1, 2, 3, 4, C. 4 chord, back to the 1. Now the 4 section is the same, still 4. Down to the 1. So the 4 section doesn't actually get changed nearly as frequently as the 1 section and the 5 section, or the turnaround section. This one right here, oftentimes we'll go from a 5 to a 4 to a 1. And then, because we have the 1 chord, and normally here we would have the 1 chord, and it would go back to the top of the song, which is also a 1 chord, in order to break that up a little bit. Then a lot of times we'll go to the 5 chord right here. And if we do all of those, these are actually the chords that are in your backing track, and it's probably the most common variation. In fact, some people don't even know that the skeleton exists. They just know this as the 12-bar blues. So you're pretty safe playing this, but if you're playing along with someone, you might want to listen to see if they make the change or not. They may not go to that 4 chord right there because they might not know about it. And so in that case, when you go to your F and you hear, oh, they stayed on the C, they don't know about that one. Okay, cool, we'll just stay on the C chord then for that whole entire first section. Let me play all of these chords with the backing track. If you feel like you can, then cool, we'll play along. Otherwise, just call out the numbers as we go. And a 2, and a 1, 2, 3, here we go. 1 chord to the 4 chord, and then back to the 1 chord. Then to the 4 chord, and then to the 1 chord. Here comes the 5 chord to the 4 chord to the 1 chord to the 5 chord, and then we're back to the top again. So that's definitely the most common variation, and then it just gets wicked crazy from there. For example, on your next page, I've given you some line 1 variations. So this is for the first line, or the 1 section. Of course, we already talked about how you could go from C to F to C and then stay on C. Or if you wanted to, you could go from C to D minor to G to C during that section instead of playing the F there. That would be something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Or if you wanted to, you could just keep C all the way through and play regular C and then not turn it into a C7 until the end, like this. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then go to the 4 chord. Or variation 4, you could go with a C to a G minor 7. Yikes, that's that chord right there. To a C7 right there. That would be something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Or you could mix it up and do all of them. You could go from a D minor to a G minor 7 to a C7. Yikes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, then on to the 4 section. So things do get crazy. I've also given you variations for line 2. Sometimes you could go from a C to an A7, or F to an F sharp diminished to a G over C to an A. Yikes, I'm not explaining any of these chords. Again, we've got entire workshops that will show you how to play every single chord you could possibly want to. Then here we could go, well, let me play some of these. So variation 2, we go something like this. Let me play the first line for you. 2, 3, 4, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4. Here comes the next line. Here's that F to F sharp diminished to C over G to A. Yeah. Or this one here, this one gets really crazy. Well, I'm going to try to play through this one and call them out as we go. Goodness gracious. Variation 4 would sound something like this after the first line. 2, 2, 4, 2. Okay, here we go. Second line variation. And F. And yeah. So did I mention it gets crazy in here? We also have variations on the third line. And this is also known as the turnaround section because the 5 chord, the whole point of the 5 chord, and we talk about this in chord workshops, the whole point of the 5 chord is to get to the 1 chord. So the 5 chord, all you really need for the 5 chord is things that lead up to the 1. So you could go like D minor to G to C. That works because of the circle of fifths. Or if you want to use the circle of fifths even more, you could go E minor, A minor, D minor, G to C. Or anything else that's going to lead into a 1 chord. The whole point there is just that you're going from you're creating something that wants to go to 1, and then you're finding a way to loop back around to the beginning. So these last 2 measures can get pretty crazy in here too. So let me play you a version of the blues that has only variations. This is the skeleton plus layers and layers and layers. Here we go. Here would be some of the options. Try to still hear that skeleton underneath. The 1 section, the 4 section, the turnaround section. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's the 4 section. The turnaround section. hopefully that felt like that was the beginning of the blues. If not, go back and count it all out. See if you can hear the 1 section and the 4 section and then the turnaround. And it gets even crazier than that. But I think that's enough craziness for one workshop. So if you're wanting to write your own blues, all you got to do is go to that backing track and just play that blues scale a whole lot. We've got songwriting workshops that talk about how to write good melodies and maybe even how to put some lyrics along with it. But you can just mess around with that, the blues scale. Again, this really needs to be something that's all based on a feeling and emotion. It's got to have that gutsy feel to it. It can't just be all of the right notes in the right order. There is no the blues without having the blues. And then on top of trying to play your own blues, trying to write your own blues, make sure you go and check out the video too that goes with these. Just click on that link right there and it'll show you all of those and it'll show you the 1, the 4, and the turnaround section for each of the songs. So as you start listening to just pop music, stuff that you would listen to in your regular life, you'll start recognizing if you hear a blues pattern because the 12-bar blues is everywhere. Good luck. Have some fun.